Thank you, Larissa, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webcast series on enterprise architecture for modern SAP landscapes. I'm Michael Blaschke, and today we're starting with a critical topic, debunking the myths that often surround clean core and SAP S/4HANA implementations. These misconceptions can derail your transformation projects before they even begin. So let's address them head on with some evidence-based insights from the SAP modernizations that I assist in. Yeah, before we actually do so, let me introduce myself briefly. I'm a principal enterprise architect at SAP with over 10 years of experience helping SAP customers navigate their S/4HANA modernizations. I sit in SAP's enterprise architecture and advisory practice, a global team as part of our premium engagement organization. And this webcast series consists of 4 sessions running weekly through July 1st. Each session stands alone, so you can join any that interests you most. We'll have interactive Q&A throughout after the presentations, and I'll share practical examples you can apply immediately in your SAP projects. Before we deep dive into the topic, we've prepared one poll, and Larissa is going to share that with you now. So the question is, which enterprise architecture challenge currently impacts your organization the most? Yeah, answers are coming in. Yeah, answer B, balancing standardization with business-specific requirements, yeah, is among the top challenges. Yeah, keep these answers coming in. That's so interesting. Yeah, we have a response rate of 64%, so let's give it 20 more seconds to get it over 75%. So definitely each answer is picked. The winner definitely is balancing standardization with business-specific requirements. Also mentioned is separating myths from facts in SAP modernization decisions, which is the core topic of today. So separating these myths that we just or come across from the actual facts or realities or truths in SAP modernization decisions. So answer A is the one we're gonna deep dive in today. We cover answers B, C, and D in upcoming webcasts of this series. So let's give it 10 more seconds to get over the 75% answer rate. All right. We ran the poll for 2 minutes. I think that should suffice. Let's end the poll and continue in our very presentation today. So here's what we'll accomplish today. We'll focus on answer A. That was just part of the poll, separating myths from facts in SAP modernization decisions. First, the why. Enterprise architecture myths create real business impact, leading to delayed decisions, budget overruns, and failed transformations. And organizations often get stuck debating outdated assumptions instead of just moving forward based on truths and realities. Second, today we're going to focus on the what. So what EA and EA myths actually mean. We tackle 7 specific myths about clean core and EA that I encounter repeatedly in customer engagements. And finally, the how EA myths are debunked. The how. I show you 5 evidence-based approaches to counter these myths with concrete examples, case studies, and architectural patterns that prove these misconceptions wrong. So Obviously, you don't have to read through all of these bullet points on this slide here by now. The deck is going to be shared on the registration page. Just keep in mind that this is the structure we walk through today, starting with why EA itself and these EA myths actually matter. So let me start with the fundamental question. Why should we care about debunking EA myths? The answer is simple but profound. These myths are costing you millions of dollars and years of delays. I've seen companies spend 4 months debating whether clean core applies to the industry while their competitors moved ahead with successful implementations. These aren't just theoretical concerns. These myths translate directly into missed market opportunities, increased technical debt, and frustrated stakeholders. For example, I worked with a manufacturing company that delayed their S/4HANA migration for 2 years because they believed the myth that clean core doesn't work for customized environments. And during those 2 years, that customer continued accumulating technical debt while missing out on embedded analytics and simplified processes that could have given them competitive advantage in the end. So this slide, as first part of the why, shows a typical customer example, a journey of a RISE with SAP customer. Notice the progression from a monolithic existing systems through various transformation stages to a modular cloud native architecture. The key insight here is that enterprise architecture serves as the navigation system for this journey. Without proper EA guidance, organizations often get lost in complexity. I've seen customers attempt to jump directly from the legacy monolith to fully modernized state without understanding the intermediate steps, without understanding the myths. And this leads to what we call transformation paralysis. They become overwhelmed by the scope and either abandon the project or drastically reduce their ambitions. The enterprise architect acts as the CTO's strategic advisor, helping map out realistic timelines, identifying dependencies, and ensuring business continuity throughout the transformation. One retail client I worked with used this approach to migrate 47 different SAP systems over 18 months while maintaining 99.89% uptime. So this is basically why enterprise architecture matters. It navigates transformation challenges. And here we see the practical definition of clean core, of that core that constitutes the target picture of all enterprise architecture efforts in the SAP universe. So this practical definition is often misunderstood. Clean core means maintaining an up-to-date, transparent, unmodified, consistent, efficient, and cloud-compliant system. The core describes the main aspects of an ERP system: extensibility, business processes, data, that is specifically business data, integration, and operations of the system. And what's crucial to understand is that clean core isn't a binary state. It's not black or white. It's a strategic, it's an approach with different implementation paths or transition architectures. The best case scenario involves an up-to-date system with minimal modifications, while the brownfield strategy focuses on making existing customizations cleaner rather than eliminating them entirely. I recently worked with a pharmaceutical company that had over 500 custom transactions. Instead of rebuilding everything, we used the brownfield approach to migrate their customizations to what we call at SAP side-by-side extensions, reducing their technical debt by 60% while preserving critical business functionality. And in turn, the greenfield approach, while ideal for some organizations, isn't always practical when you have years of business critical customizations. So this is my second answer why enterprise architecture matters, because A, it formulates the target state that is clean core, and B, it provides transition architectures on a roadmap to actually get there. And this diagram now perfectly illustrates why enterprise architecture is vital to transformation success. Without EA guidance across the timeline here, Without such guidance, organizations consistently make the same strategic mistake. They follow the red dashed line labeled continue classically as shown in this chart. This represents the traditional IT approach of trying to clean up legacy systems indefinitely before modernizing. I've seen companies spend 4 to 5 years in this trap, accumulating more technical debt while the business requirements continue evolving. Here's where enterprise architecture adds value. An EA practitioner, like so many in the audience, like myself, looks at this chart and immediately recognizes three distinct pathways, each requiring different architectural decisions. The greenfield approach, the green dashed line here, represents a complete reimplementation where EA defines the target state architecture from scratch. The brownfield approach, in turn, here the orange line, requires sophisticated architectural planning to determine what to migrate, what to retire, and what to re-architect. But here's the key EA insight that most organizations miss. The timing decision itself is an architectural choice with cascading implications. When I work with clients, I help them understand that delaying S/4HANA migration actually makes achieving clean core harder, not easier. Why? Because legacy ERP systems lack the modern extensibility frameworks, API-first architecture, and cloud-native capabilities that make clean core sustainable. So the enterprise architect's role is to model these different scenarios, quantify the risks and benefits, and guide leadership toward the optimal path towards S/4HANA. For example, I recently worked with a manufacturing client who was planning to spend 2 years on ECC cleanup. Through our EA analysis, we demonstrated that their custom pricing logic could be more elegantly implemented using S/4HANA's advanced pricing capabilities combined with side-by-side extensions via BTP. And by choosing the parallel migration approach, they reduced their total transformation times by 60% while achieving better architectural outcomes. So here again, we see why enterprise architecture is a topic at SAP, in the SAP ecosystem in general. In getting from left to right, in getting away from the red line here, away from continue classically, EA practitioners are needed. So far, I gave an answer on why enterprise architecture matters. Let's now move on to why these myths about enterprise architecture do matter, why you should take them seriously. So now let's examine the concrete business impacts of these enterprise architecture myths I will present later. The slide shows 3 critical areas where myths create real damage in your SAP projects. First, decision paralysis. I've seen leadership teams spend months debating whether clean core is quote unquote right for their organization when they should be focusing on how to actually implement it effectively. This leads to delayed architectural decisions and postponed critical design choices. Second, solution over-engineering. Teams often build overly complex workarounds because they believe clean core limitations that don't actually exist. I worked with a financial services company that built a complex middleware layer because they thought they couldn't integrate the legacy trading systems. In reality, S/4HANA's API-first architecture made this integration straightforward. And third, platform fragmentation. Believing that clean core only applies to ERP leads to disconnected modernization initiatives across the enterprise application landscape. So instead of a unified transformation strategy, you end up with multiple isolated projects that create data silos and integration complexity. The bottom line here is that these myths don't just slow down your SAP projects, they fundamentally comprise the architectural integrity of your entire digital transformation. Okay, with that, let's conclude the why section. I try to outline why enterprise architecture matters and why these EA myths matter because they have severe impact on your SAP project and your enterprises. And let's now move on to the what. So what is enterprise architecture at SAP actually? And what do enterprise architecture myths mean? So what are these myths actually? So let's move to the what. Understanding what enterprise architecture means at SAP and how we structure our architecture work. This slide shows the SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework, which defines how we approach enterprise transformation and provides the foundation for all our architectural guidance. The framework operates through 5 integrated dimensions that form the core of how SAP and its practitioners deliver enterprise architecture value. Let me walk you through each dimension and how they work together. Of course, we need an EA methodology. Our house-owned SAP EA methodology encompasses the concepts, artifacts, techniques, and principles that support transformation journeys. This is our systematic approach to guiding organizations through complex changes, refined through decades of implementations across industries. Then SAP Reference Architecture. It provides industry-specific accelerators that map business strategy to actual SAP solutions. And these are proven architectural patterns that help you, your organizations, understand how to implement SAP solutions effectively within their specific business context. Then there is tooling required. The latest and greatest in our SAP ecosystem is the SAP integrated toolchain to facilitate the actual architecture work. This tooling supports the practical adjustment and consumption of architecture content. These tools enable organizations to operationalize enterprise architecture rather than keeping it as abstract concepts on PowerPoint slides. Yeah, so what I outlined so far, the first 3 line items are actual EA artifacts. Moving on to number 4 and 5, we now talk about the actual work, about EA activities. Enterprise architecture practice focuses on operating EA within organizations adopting our methodology and establishing governance processes that make transformation happen. And the 5th dimension, EA services, represents how we support transformations by applying our methodology using tooling and reference content. And this is where SAP's enterprise architecture expertise becomes directly accessible to you, to our customers through consulting, advisory services, and hands-on implementation support. And of course, it's not only us at SAP, it's also your EA practitioners that provide EA services, so your dedicated EA teams, and it's those of SAP partners, specifically the management consulting firms and the system integrators like Accenture or Deloitte. Notice on this chart the partnership foundation at the bottom. APQC, the Open Group, plus SAP's 50 plus years of knowledge and experience. This represents a comprehensive ecosystem of industry standards and validated practices that inform our architecture framework. And what makes this framework particularly relevant for today's discussion in this webcast number 1 on EA is that it represents the authoritative source for understanding clean core principles and the application. When myths emerge in your projects about clean core limitations or complexity, this framework provides the structured foundation for understanding what's actually possible versus what's perceived as barriers. Yeah, and the strategy, capabilities, processes, solution cycle shown on the bottom right demonstrates how we systematically address enterprise transformation challenges. So with that slide, I tried to answer the question, what is enterprise architecture actually at SAP? I tried to bring it on one slide. Let's now do a deep dive on the practice, on the practical day-to-day work, because this is where all of this theory hits practice. This is where value is created. So we're still at the question, what is enterprise architecture? And this is the second part of the answer, or a deep dive into the practice dimension. So this slide reveals a critical insight about why EA myths persist. They often stem from communication breakdowns across organizational levels. So this diagram shows the complex web of stakeholders involved in enterprise transformation. There is business architecture, solution architecture, tech architecture, various governance bodies, and each group speaks a different language and has different concerns. And here's where enterprise architecture myths become particularly dangerous when a technology architect says clean core is too restrictive, quote unquote, but the business architect hears we can't innovate. You get organizational misalignment that can then derail entire programs for months. I've seen executive steering committees make decisions based on these miscommunications, based on myths, leading to suboptimal design choices. And here, back to the initial question, what is EA? The enterprise architect serves as the critical translation layer between these groups. He enters the escalator and goes up and down and communicates appropriately as per target group. So when we debunk myths, we're not just correcting technical misunderstandings, we're ensuring that strategic decisions are based on accurate information flowing between all stakeholders. For instance, I worked with a, again, financial services company where the infrastructure team believed clean core would prevent them from meeting regulatory requirements. And through structured EA communication, we demonstrated how S/4HANA's built-in compliance feature actually simplified the regulatory architecture while reducing operational overhead by about 40%. So the key takeaway for you here is that EA myth busting isn't just about technical correctness. It's about enabling informed decision making across all organizational levels. All right, let's get to the core. Here we see the transformation journey that most SAP customers must navigate, from complex legacy ERP on the left side to a simplified cloud-native modern architecture. Let me walk you through the 7 specific myths that can derail this journey from left to right, positioned around critical decision points. Myth number 1, architecting a clean core is intricate. Many architects assume clean core requires complex, sophisticated, prolonged design work. In reality, clean core simplifies architecture by leveraging SAP's standard extensibility patterns. I've seen teams reduce their architectural complexity by 60% by following clean core principles instead of building custom workarounds. Myth number 2, clean core does not allow for custom development. This is perhaps the most damaging myth in the SAP ecosystem. Clean core doesn't eliminate customization. Again, clean core doesn't eliminate customization. It redirects it to either on-stack or side-by-side extensions via BTP. I've recently had the client migrate 200 plus custom transactions to clean core patterns while preserving all business functionality. So it is possible. Myth number 3, clean core only applies to S/4HANA. Organizations often think that clean core is S/4HANA specific, but these principles extend across SuccessFactors, Ariba, Concur, and the entire SAP ecosystem and third-party applications. Clean core creates architectural coherence across all SAP solutions, not just ERP. Myth number 4, one can only architect a clean core after SAP S/4HANA adoption. So this backwards thinking causes expensive delays. Clean core principles can and should be implemented during the S/4HANA migration itself, obviously only through a brownfield approach. And the modern platform actually makes clean core easier to achieve than trying to retrofit legacy systems. Myth number 5, clean core only applies to S/4HANA public cloud editions. Teams often believe on-premise deployments can't achieve clean core. This is false. The clean core principles apply regardless of deployment model. The key is following extension patterns and avoiding core modifications. Myth number 6, and in this case 6A, because there are two myths related to business processes. So myth number 6A is complex business processes remain the gold standard in S/4HANA. So many assume that elaborate custom processes represent business sophistication. S/4HANA's simplified data models and embedded analytics often enable more sophisticated business outcomes with dramatically simplified process architectures. And now to the second myth related to business processes, so myth 6B. Under S/4HANA, SAP no longer helps with complex business processes. So this myth suggests SAP has abandoned process complexity or process sophistication, if you will. Actually, S/4HANA provides richer process capabilities through intelligent automation, embedded analytics, and workflow simplification, just delivered differently than legacy approaches. And ultimately, to answer what these EA myths actually are, myth number 7, data remains siloed without semantic harmonization. The misconception that clean core creates data isolation. Clean core actually enables superior data harmonization through standardized APIs, semantic layers, and unified data models across the entire ecosystem. I think here the key word is Business Data Cloud or BDC, SAP's latest product, to harmonize the consumption of data. All right, with that, we conclude the what section. In which I try to answer what enterprise architecture means at SAP. It's our SAP Enterprise Architecture Framework. And I also try to answer what these myths are. So if you will, this is kind of the core slide of the presentation, formulating or postulating these myths that are to be debunked to make SAP projects more effective and efficient. Which brings us to the ultimate question, how can the outlined enterprise architecture myths actually be debunked? Now we come to the how, the practical approach to countering these persistent myths I observe with concrete evidence. So this is that's important to me. This isn't about winning arguments in meetings. It's about enabling informed decision making that can make or break modernization initiatives worth millions of dollars and years of effort. So again, this isn't about winning arguments. It's really about saving millions and years of effort. The key insight here is that different myths require different types of evidence. You can't counter a technical myth with business case studies, and you can't address management misconceptions with implementation details. What I've learned through my customer engagements is that each myth has a specific evidence signature, quote unquote, the type of proof that resonates with the stakeholders who typically hold any of these myths or myth conceptions. For example, when I encounter myth 1, architecting a clean core is intricate, when I encounter this myth, this usually comes from technical architects who've been burned by overly complex frameworks in the past. They respond to concrete implementations patterns, not high-level strategy discussions. So my point here is that to debunk any given myth, you need to find the best means, so the type of proof that best resonates with the target stakeholder. Okay, let's deep dive into the how to actually debunk them. And this debunking can be done in two ways. And yes, now we do need invest more text as we really get to the core, as we really get to the substance of how to debunk the myths. One way to debunk them is by just telling the truth or the reality. So this slide shows our systematic approach to countering each of the 7 myths with specific types of evidence. Notice how each myth is paired in the reality column with a particular reality that directly contradicts the misconception, along with concrete examples that seek to prove the point. Let me at least start to walk you through the pattern here. So for myth 1, complexity, we counter with reality showing that Clean Core actually simplifies architecture work through standardized patterns and clear extension guidelines. So in particular, from IT architects or technical architects, I often heard architecting a Clean Core is intricate. And the reality I then formulate, or the truth I use to answer, is Clean Core simplifies architecture through standardized patterns and clear extension guidelines. One example would be that BTP side-by-side extensions replace complex middleware integrations. Yeah, and this is my offer to you. This is a one-slide cheat sheet that serves you in any design authority, in any management update. If you hear one of these statements, if you hear one of these EA myths that are formulated, you here find the starting point for the answer, the reality that I learned in my architecture work at our premium engagement customers. Let me give you a second example, just for you to understand how to best read this chart. Let's move on to the second myth, customization. Customization gets countered by showing advanced extension points and cloud-native patterns. The ERP with a standard APIs example proves that customization doesn't disappear. It just moves to more sustainable, upgrade-safe locations that are upgrade-ready, if you will. So whenever you hear the EA myth, quote unquote, Clean Core does not allow for custom extensions, you may want to answer Clean Core enables strategic customization through approved extension points and cloud native patterns. This is vital to the success because myths really cost money and prolong project timelines. So don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these examples listed here, as this is your one-page cheat sheet for debunking any of these formulated myths. And I here just list the 7 key ones. Of course, there are many more which require debunking too. When I started the how section, I promised 2 means of debunking the myths. One is shown here. It's explaining the reality or the truth. Another is, well, I refer to them as debunking vectors. These are more systematic vectors or approaches that I use to counter misconceptions with evidence. So each of these 5 vectors represents a different approach to providing proof that ultimately resonates with the specific stakeholder group and addresses particular types of myths. Let's look at vector 1, architectural patterns. They are so powerful. They work best for technical stakeholders who need to see concrete implementation examples. So in my work at premium engagement customers, when I encounter myth 1 about the complexity or myth 2 about customization restrictions of S/4HANA, I demonstrate clean core principles through side-by-side extensions. That's an architectural pattern. Clean core principles through side-by-side extensions, or API-first integration patterns, or standardized development frameworks. So this isn't theoretical. These are working patterns that customers can implement immediately in their S/4HANA effort. Let me give you again a second example. Yeah, and again, my recommendation here is don't worry, I'm not going to walk you through all of these points. The point for you is this is a second approach of debunking architecture myths. This is not about a counter statement to a myth being formulated during a meeting. The second approach here, the myth debunking vectors, are really more generalized practices that you can adopt beyond just conversations in meetings. So the second vector here is cross-platform evidence. It addresses the scope limitation myths. These are myth number 3, 5, and 7. So the scope limitation myths of S/4HANA. So whenever I encounter myth 3, 5, and or 7, I present real-world examples showing clean core principles applied across entire SAP ecosystems, including BTP, industry clouds, success factors, and third-party integration. So this vector is particularly powerful for enterprise architects who need to see holistic solutions. So who need to see cross-platform evidence um, that explain that under S/4HANA, the formulated scope limitations don't apply. Okay, and with that, I actually also conclude the how section, how to debunk these myths. And the answer is, well, either you formulate counter arguments, the counter realities, or as seen on this slide, you actually adopt any of these debunking vectors in your projects, which requires a bit more effort. Yeah, and with that, I conclude my presentation. Yeah, thank you very much for your precious time and listening. Do join upcoming webcasts on EA for modern SAP landscapes. Today, obviously, we cover debunking EA myths, but 3 additional ones are coming up, running weekly from June 10th today through July 1st. Yeah, and gladly powered by our SAP Global User Groups organization. Thank you for that, Larissa. Yeah, and with that, back to Larissa for moderating our Q&A session.
All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you for your presentation, for all these insights that are sometimes really not visible and hidden somewhere under the surface. So thanks for bringing it up, and especially this cheating sheet. I think this is something which is very valuable, and all the applause that you see on the screen goes to you. But of course, the reason and the next step of our session is Q&A session. With this, I will start with the session with the question that was stated in the chat, and then we move on to Q&A tool. The first question that arrived is, I keep different versions of information between SAP S/4HANA and SAP Business Suite. Will this topic be touched upon, I assume, in the session that we just announced?
Yeah, I'm currently struggling with really seeing all the questions in the Q&A, so bear with me. I'm seeing 3 of them.
Yes, the first question that I've just brought up was stated in the chat.
Okay.
But I also asked the participants, please state your questions in Q&A tool. So we consolidate all the questions there, and we'll then move there.
Got it. So we start with the questions in the chat. And again, yeah, the question is, I keep different versions of information between S/4HANA and SAP Business Suite. Will this topic be touched upon? It will be touched upon in the series. It wasn't touched upon today because this is just a practical challenge in an SAP project. It's not necessarily a myth. So the fact that information between systems is kept in different versions is just a practical challenge. It's not necessarily a myth. And today we are trying to debunk myths.
All right, thank you for that. And let's move to Q&A tool. And the first question is, are SAP solution architects typically considered technical or functional/business architects?
Yeah, very good question. So SAP solution architect. So this touches upon a challenge of the architecture community that has persisted for decades. the different labels or roles of architects. Yeah, we have business architects, enterprise architects, solution architects, IT architects. So in general, my understanding is IT architecture is the family of architecture roles. And then there are enterprise architects overseeing the whole enterprise, including business and technology. There are solution architects overseeing exactly one solution. For example, an SAP solution, predominantly S/4HANA, but it might also be BTP or an S/4HANA module like S4 Finance. And then third, there are software architects. So they are really responsible for the architecture of any given software. Now, to the question, are SAP solution architects typically considered technical or functional business architects? So in our ecosystem, in the SAP ecosystems, they are typically considered hybrid architects who bridge both technical and functional business domains. So it's not either or, it's both. The question is just to which extent. So here, sub-solution architects bridge both technical and functional business domains, but they lean more toward the functional business side in most organizations. So SAP solution architects are usually business process focused. They understand how SAP modules like FICO, SD, material management support business processes. They are functional experts. They have deep knowledge of SAP standard functionality and configuration. They are integration specialists, so how different SAP modules work together and with other systems. As in SAP modernizations, they tightly work together with multiple SAP solution architects. Then there are also requirements translators, so converting business needs into SAP solution designs. Yeah, so the short answer to the question is they are considered both, but they lean more toward the functional business side.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is, will there be any real life examples, like what to do if there is no released body for an old user exit?
So that's an excellent question that highlights a critical gap between myth-debunking theory and implementation reality. I mean, obviously, what I've presented is structured for high-level presentations when you encounter these myths, but you're absolutely right that real-world technical scenarios like no released body for an old user exit are whether the rubber meets the road, really. So for a more complete myth debunking approach that I showed here, you would need indeed real technical examples. So user exit is one example. You have BADI migration patterns, specific steps when no direct BADI exists. You have custom table. So as an example, as a real technical example, CDS view transformations, how to preserve functionality while achieving clean core. So I do admit I presented these myths and how to debunk them on a high level. The point is that on the real technical level, these myths don't often materialize as much as in steering committee decision making, as much as in PMO program management. That's where I predominantly observe these myths, and that's where I should debunk or tackle them.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is, what are standardized development frameworks that you've mentioned as part of Myth 1?
Yeah, so to answer it, let's first go back to Myth 1. Myth 1 is architecting a clean core is increment. It's tough to do. It's a difficult challenge. And you're absolutely right to question that. Standardized development frameworks was maybe a bit too vague and potentially misleading. So let me clarify what I actually meant in the context of clean core and Myth 1. So SAP's clean core extension patterns. Here are side-by-side extensions on BTP. So you use a cloud application programming model for custom applications. Then there is in-app extensibility. You have key user tools, custom fields, or custom logic within S/4HANA. Which is another standardized development framework, which makes the work actually pretty easy. Another example is API first integration pattern, so using released APIs instead of direct database access. And another example is event-driven architectures. You use SAP Event Mesh for decoupled integrations. So these for me are standardized development frameworks. Yeah, probably the terminology was a bit vague or potentially misleading. So that's what I should have said. And in answering the question, let me add what are not standardized development frameworks. So ABAP development is not a standardized development framework. It's still needed, but should follow clean core principles. Also, custom enhancement implementations are not standardized development frameworks, or direct database modifications aren't either. So with that question, you caught an important imprecision. The real message for Myth 1 should be clean core provides clear extension patterns and toolsets that simplify architecture work by guiding developers proven paths for the customizations that don't compromise the core. But I mean, as you thought to yourself by now yourself, this is a pretty long statement. This is why I shortened it down to architecting a clean core is intricate.
All right. The next one is not really a question, but more an opinion. In my opinion, the question is not whether it is possible to consider clean core aspects in a brownfield migration, but whether it makes sense to promote the clean core paradigm in a complex project. This often overtasks the customer project team also in terms of target achievement in time and budget. Any comments on this?
Yeah, you make an excellent point. So clean core is an additional paradigm overlay on already complex brownfield migrations can create difficulty, scope creep. Teams trying to fix everything during migration or analysis paralysis, spending excessive time evaluating every customization against clean core principles. Another one is the resource strain, so adding clean core assessment to already stretched project teams. And then, of course, the timeline risk, perfect becoming the enemy of good or good enough and on time delivery. So here's a pragmatic approach I offer. Focus on preventing new technical debt during migration rather than retrofitting existing customizations. So save comprehensive clean core transformation for in brownfield post go live optimization phases when teams have bandwidth and proven system stability. And the myth debusting I offered here should probably better acknowledge this reality. So we could argue like clean core principles can guide migration decisions without requiring immediate remediation of all legacy customizations.
All right. I hope this helps. At least we can see all the thumbs up coming up.
Yeah. Keep these questions coming up. Potentially we have some more in the Q&A.
I can't see more questions in Q&A. Let me check the chat. By the way, I've already posted the link to our upcoming session next week on June 17. You can add an invite to your calendar if you didn't do it yet. So stay tuned with us. And now is the chance to bring up the question, and you can actually also unmute yourself if you would like to ask your question directly to Michael. Otherwise, we see and monitor if there are more questions come in. Let's give it a moment. All right. So to check, okay. I can't see more raised hands. I also can't see any additional questions in the chat or in the Q&A tool. I would like to thank you, Michael, for being our speaker today, for bringing up all this insight and this content that actually shows there are a lot of decisions are unfortunately taken under wrong considerations and assumptions, which is actually fatal because you lose your time and money. And yes, I can only suggest you to stay tuned with us. The next session takes place on June 17. We will talk about enterprise architecture for innovation platform ecosystems. Michael will be our speaker again, so please join us. We will be very happy. And the materials of this session today will be available via playlist on the YouTube. I've posted already link in the chat. And as you receive notifications from me, you will also find the link to the YouTube playlist there. With this, I would like to thank you, everyone, and hope to see you and welcome you in our session next week. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.